to the Divorce Support Club podcast.
Hi and welcome to the June meeting of the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Black, and Lauren Preedy of Ian Walker Family Law. We set up the Divorce Support Club to provide a friendly and informative but informal space to give information, to suggest strategies and to give guidance for anybody who's going through any kind of breakup or separation. So Lauren is here from Ian Walker to answer any legal questions that might arise. Lauren's the head of the divorce team at Ian Walker, and she's got loads of experience supporting clients through separation and divorce. I'll introduce myself properly in a second. So we'll have a sort of 15-20 minute presentation today, and then we'll take questions, and Lauren and I will talk generally around the subject afterwards. Okay, so just a very brief introduction to who I am. I'm Claire Black. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I'm a master NLP practitioner, former lawyer, divorced mum of 2 boys, and a second wife and stepmom to 3 grown-up children. And I'm also the author of a book, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence. And if anybody would like a copy of that, please do just let me know. Aims of the DSC are to help you concentrate on you, to help you become calm and get clarity, to focus on what you can control, to see options and choices, to communicate more effectively, and to take positive steps forward to creating a new and vibrant future. So today we're going to look at strategies to support your children before, during and after your separation or divorce. And many of my clients worry about the effect that their separation or divorce will have on their children, and they ask how they can best support their children through the process, however old they are. There's lots of advice out there about small children, and there's much less out there in terms of how to support adult children through your divorce. So I will talk about that a little bit later in the talk. My main point, and really the overriding message that I want to really make today, is that your children will follow your lead. Children learn by modelling the behaviour of those around them. And so when you use the strategies and techniques that we've talked about in all of our sessions together, they will see a parent who's calm, who can make choices in a crisis, who can recognise their emotions and has strategies to handle some of the curveballs that might come their way. And by watching you, they will also learn how to adapt, how to handle challenge, how to process their emotions, and how to move forward. So when you make a conscious choice to focus on you, to get calm and clarity and take back your power and identify what you can do, they will also see that and they'll follow your lead. When you look to see the silver lining, for example, they will also learn to do that. So right from the word go, you can set the tone for what your divorce looks like by the way in which you even tell your children that you're getting divorced. And so that's where I want to start in terms of talking about how to tell your children that you're separating or you're going to get divorced. So I've separated this into do's and don'ts. Important things to remember: plan the conversation. This isn't a conversation to have off the cuff. Plan what you want to say, plan when you want to say it as well. So have the conversation at a time when you aren't rushed, you're not going to be interrupted, you don't have to go anywhere in the next half hour, and probably not when they're just in from school or they're tired or they're hungry or it's just before bedtime. If you can, cooperate with your ex-partner. Talk it through together, work out a joint approach that you want to present to the children. Reassure them that although you might not be a couple anymore, you are still their parents, and separate the 2 roles in your mind if you can. The role of this person as your ex-partner and the role of this person as the father or mother of the children. Keep it as simple as you can. So use language that suits their age. What you might say perhaps to a 14-year-old or a 25-year-old who might be aware of tension, who might be aware of arguing, would be very different to the words you might use to a 4-year-old who perhaps needs a much more simple explanation of what's happening. It's really helpful to explain what will change and what won't change. Children like to have certainty. So perhaps you can say, you will be able to spend much more one-on-one time with both of us now. Or perhaps, Daddy has agreed that he will always be taking you to football on Thursdays, or whatever it might be. Explain what will change, what will stay the same, and what won't, and try to highlight the upsides for them. Give them time for questions and answer those questions honestly. Ask them if they've got any questions. Accept it, of course, if they don't, but if they do have questions, then answer them honestly. And if you don't know the answer to a question that they might have, then that's okay. And it's okay to say you don't know, but you will work it out over time, and that just reassure them that things will be all right and they will be okay. Other things to reassure them that this isn't their fault. They didn't do anything wrong. This is an adult problem that only adults can solve together. So it's nothing to do with them. Also reassure them, of course, that you both love them and that you will always love them and that you will always be their mum and their dad. One little thing to be aware of as well is, well, maybe it's a big thing, your body language. So we've talked about this a bit before, but over 90% of our communication is in our body language and the tone that we use, and the way we hold our bodies. So be really aware of this. And I would always advise that you practice what you want to say and you mentally rehearse it. And you could even act it out in front of a mirror or whatever, just to make sure that your body language is matching the words that you're using. So practice what you want to say. Take deep breaths. Don't rush it. And then some little don'ts. So however old the children are, whether they are small, medium-sized or large, don't tell them things that they don't need to know. They don't need to know all the nitty-gritty details. They don't need to know about the affair. They don't need to know about the horrible things that you've said to each other. Remember, when you're having this conversation, you are talking about these children's other parent, the other person who's 50% responsible for their being in the world. And remember also that you once loved this person enough to have a child with them. And there is lots of evidence to show that children who hear criticism of their other parent find themselves conflicted internally. You know, if my mum or my dad is that awful, that's part of me, and that can cause internal conflict for the children. Don't blame each other when you're having this conversation. Keep your arguments between the two of you. Don't bring the children into it, and don't ask them to take sides. Don't rush it, so choose a time when you don't have to rush off. And lastly, don't make promises that you can't keep. So especially if you haven't worked out your financial settlement yet, you can't really promise that you will all stay in the family home, for example. You might not be able to keep that promise later. What you can do is promise that you'll always be there for them. You can promise that you will always love them and that you will always put them first. But don't make promises that you can't keep. So that's something about the conversation when you're telling your children. And I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about some strategies that you can use to support your children before, during and after divorce, and also to empower them to cope. So we've talked about this a little bit before. It's really important to remember that your children will also go through their own grief or healing curve at the end of your marriage or relationship. They will probably also feel angry, shocked, in denial, confused. And they may also begin to wonder, if I had done something differently, would this be happening? So just be very aware that they are also having this healing cycle going on, and it's likely to be a very different journey to yours. Check in with them, check in with how they feel. And remember, they may swirl around this. You know, one day they may feel really angry and another day they may feel really sad, and that's okay. Help them to handle those emotions. So how do we do that? The most important thing is active listening. So how do you actively listen? When you're actively listening to someone, you are concentrating on hearing what they're saying. You're listening and you're being neutral. You're not thinking about what you're going to say next. So just listen, be patient, don't put words in their mouths for them, and ask questions. So ask, you know, can you tell me a bit more about that? How does that make you feel? You can reflect back as well what you've heard. So they might say that they feel sad, and you could say, well, I hear that you're feeling really sad about X or Y. Reflect their emotions back to them, and that will help them to start to identify them themselves. You can also ask for clarification. You know, what does that feeling feel like? How does that feel in your body? You know, where do you feel it? It means that they're going to be heard. It will help them to identify their feelings. It will help them to give their feelings a name and acknowledge them, and also reassure them that their feelings are normal. I talked a little bit just now about identifying where they might feel that feeling in their body. So perhaps your child says, I feel really sad and I feel it in my tummy. So show them how they can soothe that part of their body, perhaps by stroking their tummy in a gentle circle to help calm that feeling down. Some children might want to draw how they feel, or perhaps create something, perhaps out of Play-Doh or with clay, or they might want to act it out with their toys. All of that's great. It gets it out of their mind and out of their head and into the world around them. So anything that you can do to help them to express their feelings is a really good thing. Some other strategies that you could show your children that we've actually talked about in these sessions before. So you could show them how to breathe to bring calm. We've done this before. So breathing in for 5, holding for 2, and breathing out while you count to 7 can help to calm children. Or there's a little technique that I find really helpful with children where you hold your hand up and you take the finger on the other hand and you breathe in while you move up the finger, and then out while you move down, and then in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And that's just a really simple technique that all children can understand. That when they're feeling perhaps a rush of emotion, they're feeling angry, they're feeling sad, whatever it might be, they can breathe and use that focus on their hands to focus their breath. You can also help your children to find the silver lining. You can ask them questions about what, if there was one tiny good thing about this, what would it be? Some children might say, well, there's nothing good about this, but persevere. Okay, if there was, what might it be? I remember talking about this with a client once, and she asked her daughter what one good thing about this was. And eventually she said, well, do you know what? Actually, I really enjoyed going swimming with Daddy on Saturday. He didn't used to take me swimming. And this weekend he did. And she'd enjoyed that. So there are good things. You just have to look hard for them sometimes. You could also make a list of things that they enjoy doing that you can then decide that you're going to do and commit to doing with them. You could plan some special activities. Start to create some new memories. So when you do something with them that's fun, take some photos and then put those photos up around your house, put them on your fridge, put them up so that you can remind yourselves that life is still good. Ask them what they're glad about today. Help them to focus on the things that happened that have been good. Ask them what they've achieved today, what they've learned today, what they're proud of today. And you can also show them how to change how they feel in the blink of an eye. And we've talked about this a little bit before too. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of movement to break a negative state. So children love doing this kind of thing. When you're feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit angry or a bit sad, jump up and down, shake your whole body off, run around the garden 3 times, pull a silly face, blow a raspberry. Or you could, I remember doing this with my children, get some of those rocket balloons and you can blow them up and then whiz them off around the garden and imagine that that's your feelings being dissipated around the garden. So there's all kinds of things you can do that will help you to feel better, to shift a negative state quite quickly and to introduce feel-good hormones. You can also show your children how to be in control of the clicker. So I love this quote from Arianna Huffington. Whenever I'd complain or be upset about something in my own life, my mother had the same advice. Darling, just change the channel. Don't replay the bad, scary movie. So you can show your children how they can ask better questions, just like you can. What would your best friend say to you right now? What have you done today that you're proud of? What would help you to feel better right now? What have you learned? Children are really good at writing their own story about what's going on. And just like us, their minds are like Google. So show them how to change the questions that they're asking in their mind to questions that will help empower them. You could start keeping lists of all the things that they've done that they're proud of and their achievements and ways that help them to feel better. So you could have a joint list perhaps on your fridge of things that help us to feel better. Going for a walk, having a bike ride, jumping up and down, watching something funny on TV, whatever it might be. And look for opportunities to introduce those strategies for your children. You could also perhaps make a joint bucket list of things that you want to do and places you want to go. I remember doing this with my own children, and we created a massive list of all the places in the world we'd like to visit. We haven't been to very many of them, but the ones we have been to have been fantastic. And that moment in time where we sat together and dreamed about doing those things was a really important moment in time. So what else can you do? You can always be the best role model you can be on your time. Regardless of what your ex-partner does, you're in control of what sort of parent you are when the children are with you. So you can also choose how you interact with your ex when they see you together. If you can co-parent successfully, your children will learn fantastic lessons in things like compromise, flexibility, discussion, give and take, and listening. If, on the other hand, you can't co-parent, perhaps your ex is very challenging, but you're able to start setting firm boundaries and stick to them, they will see you doing that and they will learn from what you're doing. They will learn to set boundaries themselves. And that's a really useful skill if you've got a parent who's very difficult. So think about what your children will learn from how you communicate with your ex. Will they learn how to argue well? Will they learn how to put boundaries in place? Or will they learn how to please others at their own expense? So think about the role model that you are, and your children will follow you. Something that I do a lot with clients of mine is to create a vision for your parenting. So what do you want your parenting relationship with your ex to look like? Is it a co-parenting model? What do you want it to look like in 1 year or in 5 years or at your child's wedding? What do you want to feel about what you do and say now in 5 years' time? And is what I'm about to say or do going to take me closer or further away from that vision that I have? If you can, share your vision with your ex-partner, and you may find that you have common ground. If you have common ground and you can come up with a joint kind of parenting model, then that's fantastic. And you can kind of hold each other to account a little bit on that. If you can't, then it's still worth creating a vision of your parenting that's simply for you. And that might include how you will manage communication with your ex, what you will and won't accept, and the kind of boundaries that you want to put in place. Either way, keep it at the front of your mind whenever you do or say anything. Consistency. And I know lots of parenting books talk about consistency all the time. The importance of routine, consistent boundaries, consistent guidelines, and so on. So if you can, it's always a good idea to agree a consistent approach with your ex-partner for important things across both households. So for example, my ex and I agree that internet usage, mobile phones, general acceptable behaviour, we can put together a consistent approach. Sometimes though, you can't, and that's okay. And I've often explained to my children that their dad and I may not agree on a particular rule or a particular guideline or a particular viewpoint, but that's okay. There can be different rules in different households. And just as there might be a different rule in their friend's house, there might be a different rule in dad's house to in my house, and that's okay. If you can, keep consistent boundaries and routine at your own home. You are in control of what boundaries and routines you put in place there. So think about what routines and what boundaries you want in your place. And lastly, don't sweat the small stuff. Remember what you can and can't control. So you can absolutely keep those boundaries at your own house, but you can't control what the other parent does at their house. For example, I've had lots of clients worry about how late the children stay up, or that they might have McDonald's every other weekend, or that kind of thing. Don't sweat that stuff. Keep the arguing for things that actually really, really matter, and perhaps let go of the things that you can't control. I know that's easier said than done, but it's very freeing when you manage to do it. So there's lots of research out there that suggests that it's conflict that damages children, not separation or divorce per se. Most children just want to be free to love their mum and their dad. They don't want to be caught in the middle, and they don't want to hear you arguing about them. So I really like these couple of mantras. So love your children more than you hate your ex is a really good one to remind yourself of. And also kids first, ego last. So put them first, step into their shoes, and really think about how they feel about how your relationship is panning out. Some tips here to help you to stay calm and civil. Use your imagination to help you. So when you need to see your ex, if perhaps you find that very difficult, imagine yourself with slopey shoulders. Imagine yourself wearing a Teflon suit. Perhaps imagine yourself wearing a big space helmet so that negativity can just bounce off. Or find something that's funny that can make you smile before you see your ex. So I have one client who always imagines her ex-husband as Kevin the teenager, and it just helps take some of the power out of their interactions. I have another one who finds it very difficult when his ex-wife comes to drop the children at his house, because she often brings issues to the doorstep. So he pinned up on his front door, behind it, so that no one else could see it, a picture of Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act, because it made him smile, it made him laugh, and it meant that when he opened the door, he was in a better mood, and he was then able to put in place some boundaries. So he would say, I'm not willing to discuss that here and now. Please email me about the issue. So focus on what you can do, not what you can't. So you can stop and breathe and think before you speak, before you act, before you respond. You can avoid entering into conflict when you drop the children off or pick them up. You can use pleasantries. You can say, hi, hope you're well. You can pass on important information about what the children have been up to, for example. Maybe one of them has had a cold all week, or maybe one of them has achieved something really special this week, and you can share that information. So focus on what you can do rather than what you can't. And as my 14-year-old very succinctly put it last week, remember, you don't have to be friends, but you can be friendly. Moving on very quickly to talk about adult children in particular. I know that there's not a lot of literature around about adult children and how divorce affects adult children, but I've seen it in my own experience. So I asked my stepdaughter, who's 30, this question: what would you like us to know about how it was when your parents divorced? Her parents divorced when she was 14, but she's grown up with it over that period of time. And she said, remember that it's a shock for me too. So even though I may have left home, even though I may be independent, even though I may not have lived at home for 10, 20, 30 years, your divorce will still affect me. It will still come as a shock. It can still be devastating when your parents sell the home that you grew up in. So just be aware that they will also go through that grief curve or that healing curve. Ask them how they feel. Be there to listen and to answer questions, just like the do's and don'ts that we talked about earlier for younger children. Don't overshare. So as children grow older, their relationship with you changes, and it may become more of a friendship than a hands-on kind of parenting relationship, if you like. And when things are challenging, it can be really tempting to rely on your children for emotional support. Try to avoid that. Sharing the kind of gory details of your latest row with your ex, or your date last night, or the ins and outs of exactly what the arguments are that you're having is likely to be really uncomfortable for your child. So choose instead to look for that emotional support somewhere else, perhaps from friends, or better still, a coach or a therapist who's trained to help you handle those emotions. Don't ask me to pick a side. So just like younger children, adult children don't want to be caught in the crossfire between you. They may feel hurt, they may feel conflicted, they might be upset. So remind yourself, your child is 50% of both of you. They love both of you, and however old they are, they really don't want to be in the middle and have to pick sides. They may also question their childhood. So, was this my fault? Did you stay together for us? Was the happy childhood I remember a lie? And many grown-up children find that their parents' divorce throws up all kinds of questions and doubts. So make sure that you reassure them about this. It's not their fault. It's not their responsibility. And just because you're divorcing now doesn't mean that their memories are false or that they're built on a lie. So reassure them, although you're choosing to be apart now, you chose to be together at that point, and those memories are still special. Be flexible. So don't make me choose at Christmas. So once you're divorced, adult children will have to spread their time even thinner at times like Christmas. And if, like my stepson, you're married with children of your own, and your wife also comes from a divorced family, it might be impossible to keep everybody happy. And there are no courts or processes to go through to reach an answer. And it's often the adult children themselves who have to make choices. So if you can make it easier for them, then do that. The message I've heard loud and clear is that when we're flexible about our arrangements and we're willing to share time, it makes things so much easier for them. And lastly, please celebrate my achievements together. So on those days when we're celebrating my wedding, my graduation, my 21st birthday, my 30th birthday, whatever it is, I would really appreciate it if you could be there to celebrate with me. Do your best to see the good in your partner. At least be friendly and civil, and put your love for your children above your dislike for your ex. So those are the messages that she gave me very, very clearly about adult children and divorce. And essentially, it goes back to my original message. However old your children are, you're always going to be their parent. They'll always look to you for a lead, and show them that despite the fact that you're separating, you're still there for them when it matters, and they will follow your lead. And I had a couple of questions in that we could perhaps answer now, Lauren. So my ex is, I believe, on the narcissistic spectrum and does all they can to make things difficult for me. What can I do? First of all, I would suggest that you try to establish a legal parenting plan, and probably Lauren can probably talk about this a little bit more. Agree things in writing, work with a lawyer or a coach to put together a parenting plan with details. And it might be expensive, but it might be worth considering. If you've got younger children, you can use an app like My Family Wizard, which enables all contact about your children to be in one place. You can message, you can add comments, you can work from a joint diary. And even has a tonometer. So if you write a message that the app thinks is a bit inflammatory, it will tell you, and it will say, do you think you should change that? And so you can change it.
And I suppose with the question you just raised about a parenting plan, is a parenting plan is, so if you can either have a look on the resolution.org website, but also on the cafcas.gov website, there's information about parenting plans on there. And what they do is they help the parents to think through different issues. They're not legally binding as they stand like that. However, if both people have had legal advice on them, then it forms a really good basis for if there needed to be a court application in the future, which we always hope won't need to happen. But if it did, that forms a really good basis for evidence of what you have agreed at the time. So we encourage people to try to come to those arrangements, and it gives that structure rather than there being ad hoc messages. So you might have said on one message, oh, this is what we're going to do at the weekends, and then 2 weeks later there's another message, oh, I want to change that Saturday, or 2 weeks later, oh, we agreed that about holiday, but I can't do the Thursday, can you do the Wednesday? It stops all of that. It makes a really clear message at the beginning about what can and can't be changed, with commitment from both people that they will stick to that. And again, that gives the stability to children that they need, so they know where they're going to be.
I think as well, in terms of going back to the My Family Wizard idea as well, that also means that all your communication is in one place, which would help with, it might be part of your parenting plan that you use the app. So that you keep everything in one place, and that means then that you're not receiving a text here, an email there, a WhatsApp here, and you can keep everything in the same place, and you can easily follow the paper trail.
And that links back to the previous conversations we've had about your own boundaries.
Yep.
And not having to have that reaction or angry response because you've received an email at a certain time of night.
Yeah.
So I would recommend it from people that I've known that have used it, give very good feedback.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Going back to the question about the ex who makes things very difficult, you mentioned boundaries, and that was going to be the next point I was going to make. Decide how you want to communicate. Be clear what you will respond to, what you won't respond to. So I won't respond, for example, to a barrage of texts sent to me, but I will respond to one polite email that comes in. Ignore the personal attacks. Use the strategies that we've talked about in these sessions, the stop, breathe, think, act, and be very aware of how you respond. So remember, you always have the choice about how you respond, so discretionary engagement, as I call it. You can choose whether, how, and when to respond to anything. And practice your boundaries, practice them in front of the mirror. You can also teach your children how to put boundaries in place. So you could help them by saying, okay, what boundary do you want to put in place here? How would you like this to look? And how could you then put that across to your other parent, for example? You can help them to practice doing those things. So it's all about empowering the children to be able to handle things for themselves. What else can you do? So you can encourage your children to share their concerns with you. You can identify and name their emotions, as we talked about earlier. Importantly, you can make your home a very safe space for them. So regardless of whether their other home feels what's the right word, whether their other home feels comfortable, you can make your home into a safe space, so that they don't feel that they're being pressured at your place, and that they're not asked lots of questions and all of that kind of thing. I think it's really important to remember being a good role model at this point as well, because in this scenario, your child's probably not being modelled that kind of parenting from their other parent. So it's even more important that they see really good role modelling from you in this scenario. Still avoid speaking ill of the other parent in front of the children if you can, to keep them out of the conflict between you. Don't use your child as a go-between or a negotiator. And use strategies like the grey rock strategy that we talked about a couple of sessions ago. And again, that's another strategy that you can teach your child. Don't overshare your emotions with the very difficult parent or the very difficult ex. Be as boring as possible. Take out the drama from the situation. And keep your expectations low. Don't expect that they're going to change now. If they've always been difficult, they're not going to suddenly become nice. And maybe you need to accept that co-parenting isn't possible, and that you need to parallel parent. So you parent on your time, they parent on their time, and you both kind of leave each other to get on with it, barring kind of abuse or anything that you need to perhaps step in on.
Well, you talked about the sharing of a vision.
And
I think that's a really interesting concept of whose vision is it, and do the visions align, and if you've got extended families or families that have joined together, how does that work? And I think that's interesting what you just said then, that it's possible that shared vision won't ever happen.
Yeah.
And there has to be an acceptance of that, and managing it in the best way you can, and to not beat yourself up about it, if that's the right way of putting it, that if you've done your best and have put down your boundaries and you're doing your best to achieve that, but actually the other person simply won't engage with it, what more can you do?
Yeah, and that then comes back to that circle of control that we've talked about before. You can only control your part. You can't control their part. So you can control what you do. You can control your choices and what you say. And you can also control what strategies you teach your children. However old they are, you can teach them some of the strategies that we've talked about in some of these sessions to help them to handle a very challenging person on the other side.
And one of the things as well that I jotted down to raise again is when you're talking about like new relationships, and we touched on that in one of the other sessions, that if one parent has a new relationship and the other doesn't, and clearly that is going to cause all different kinds of emotions for both people. And I often find that I have clients that are on one side or the other. And they may feel a massive sadness about it because the other person has a new partner, or they may feel an anger. And again, that brings us back to what you can control.
Yeah.
But if there is tensions caused by the new partner and their behaviours, that can be a really kind of sensitive and difficult thing to deal with, can't it?
Yeah, it can. And again, it comes down to setting those boundaries in place, I think, and communicating firmly but fairly what you are willing and not willing to accept.
The other thing that comes up quite often, which is which we can link back to the parenting plan, is there's often very strong views on, well, if you're going to introduce a new person to the children, how should that happen? Should that happen with the other parent knowing beforehand? Should there be a time scale? Should the other parent be there? So these are all things that are very difficult issues to know how to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that the part of the reason why they're challenging to deal with is because there's no right and wrong answer. It will always depend on the individual circumstances, the personalities involved, of the children and the adults involved, and the relationships that they all have. So it's very difficult to give concrete, solid, this is the right way to do it advice, because it will always depend on the circumstances, and thinking through the different options in your individual circumstances.
Yeah, the other thing as well, Claire, that I always find difficult is when the things come up about honesty, And you mentioned that on one of your first slides, to answer questions honestly. And I often get people saying to me, well, what, and this is where, of course, a specialist like you can help in a way that I can't, to help deal with that question. And for instance, people will say, well, how much do I say? They're asking, the children are a bit older, or they might be young and just are asking very frank, direct questions.
Yes. So I've had this myself in my own situation. You know, my ex-husband, left for a new partner, and very early on, my children asked all sorts of questions about who this new person was. And I remember,
how old were they?
They were 3 and 1 when we split up, and they were probably asking these questions. The older one was probably asking these questions quite soon, maybe when he was about 4 or 5. And I remember thinking to myself, right, I need to give him an answer that's true, but isn't critical or judgmental. So I used to say, well, Mummy and Daddy weren't getting on so well, and we decided that we were going to live apart, and Daddy decided he wanted to live with this person instead. It's just factual, without kind of going into any sort of criticism of either of the other people. And also I think it's important in my situation, I thought it was very important to be as supportive as I could be of their relationship. You know, it was obviously here to stay, and actually, who am I going to damage by being very anti that relationship and being very critical? So when they had a new baby, for example, I made sure that I took our children across so they could go to the hospital to meet the new baby, because I was thinking, this is important for my children. This is now a sibling that they have.
One of the phrases that comes up a lot is one person saying, they left us. Yep. And to me, that's a really damaging statement to make, because that's fully placing blame, and that's what you mean to avoid any blame. Keep it factual.
Keep it very factual, and really think about the language that you're using. And actually, this is really important in terms of when the children move between one home and another as well. You're thinking about the language that you're using and what picture that paints. So rather than talking about handing over your children, or, as a client said to me this morning, exchanging our children, you know, that kind of makes them feel a bit like, or gives me an image of, you know, kind of handing over a suitcase or a possession. And if you can talk instead of dropping you off at Daddy's house, or picking you up from Daddy's house or Mummy's house, or whatever it might be, again, taking any kind of emotive language out of the words that you're using, is going to really help the children, and that's what matters.
No, very, very, language is, well, we've covered it a few times, that's really important. And as you said, practicing and making sure you don't react will help people to make the right decisions about the language they use.
Practicing, definitely. So practicing in front of a mirror, thinking about the words that you want to use. Really, really important.
In the context of law, so I'm a trained collaborative solicitor, and in the collaborative remit, you don't have another solicitor as an opponent. You don't have the other side. You don't have any arguments. The language is very based around us working together and four-way meetings. And it took me a bit of time to adjust to the language that you use, because you're so ingrained in saying certain things for such a long time. It does take practice to do that. You really, really notice the difference in the reaction to people when you do that. And when I was doing the training about 5 or 6 years ago, it's really quite a liberating thing to realize that using the words we instead of you and things like that. And also they taught us in the training I did about, if you're having any get-togethers, to think about, well, where are people sitting? And especially if you're feeling a bit vulnerable, would you prefer to sit by a door so you can excuse yourself to the toilet if you want to, or would you prefer to sit near a window because you think you might get a bit hot and bothered? So all of those things I think are really useful to think about, to help you deal with the situation as best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And then all those things that we've talked about before, like what you wear and how you stand, and all of those things are going to help as well. Yeah. I had another thought about language as well, which is that, you know, and honesty actually. So when you talk about honesty, my truth might be different to your truth, might be different to that person over there's truth. So we will all see the world in different ways. And so one person's "well, you left" would be another person's, they would explain it in a different way. There's no, and your truth is your truth. So I think bearing in mind when you're talking to your ex-partner about how you're going to present to the children, think about, I call it maps of the world. You know, what is your map of the world? And remember that your map of the world isn't necessarily exactly truth, it's your truth, but it may not be the other person's truth. So again, if you can keep the language neutral, you'll avoid kind of invading each other's maps of the world, if that makes sense.
And sometimes things take time. It's the old cliche that things take time to settle into new patterns. You go through the table of grief with the up and down. I can't remember what you called it, Claire.
The healing cycle.
The healing cycle. And to realise that you may take a different time to go through that as your spouse, or they may not be going through it. So to give yourself the time and patience. And we talked about being kind to ourselves, which is really important.
Yeah. So, and when you've got children and you're sitting in the same room and you're explaining what's happening, you're all on that journey. You know, you're all on different points on that journey and all at different stages on that healing cycle. So I think it's really important if you can bring that into your consciousness and remember that, and that's always really helpful. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd like to put. I don't think anything's popped up while we've been talking, but do feel free to ask any questions if you would like to. I hope we've managed to answer most of the questions you might have had.
I've gone through all of my notes and everything that I had to raise today, Claire, but I think that was really helpful, and I think that it might raise a lot of things for people to think about, that they might want to come back to us later once they've had time to digest the things we've spoken about, or over the next coming week something may happen in your life and you think, oh, I can relate to that, and we talked about that, but I need a bit more information. So please do feel free to come back to us about any of the topics.
Okay, so thank you ever so much for coming, and thank you. There's a thank you in the chat. We look forward to seeing you all again very soon.